I think the previous book that I did, Trauma and Identity, was so not rigid, but it had to be sort of bullet points. It had to, if I wanted to write about IoPT work, I had to put it under headings. I had to find some kind of quite strict, even rigid framework for it. And I think this other book came out of the well, not stress, but the tension that was in me from writing the previous book. And so this next book is really rather random. And it's sort of different ideas that came to me over the time, and things that I learned from doing processes with people. And one of the things I learned, which I think is probably the most important thing, is that we never stop learning. And yes. I came with this idea, we are always student practitioners. We never know everything. We are always learning. And so I would sit here working online and write notes, and then I'd write something down and I think, wow, I never thought about that before. And then I would carry it on and write something from there. And the other thing that I did, which I really liked in the book, is finding quotes from other people. Like the one I really loved was one I found from Vincent van Gogh, who wrote to his brother Theo. And in one of his letters, he wrote, to love is to love with no thought for the winnings. And I thought, wow, that's really insightful to say that just to love is just to love without needing to be loved back. This is the winnings. And so that I just started to write from that. I started to write an essay, and it ended up being about my mother, being about my relationship with my mother. It was rather a nice little essay. And at the end, I put in, my mother we lived in the States when I was a child. When I was 6 years old, my father was sent to the States. And my mother had this was in the 1950s, a beautiful American Buick car, which she was very So I put at the end of this essay, this lovely black and white photograph I've got with my mother sitting in her Buick car with her dark glasses on, looking very 50s. But that's what I just liked doing, was having a starting thing and then just following it and seeing where it goes from an IoPT perspective. So all of the essays are from an IoPT perspective. Some of them are very directly focused towards practitioners. So there's a lot, I think, in there that is possibly of interest to practitioners. And then there are other things that are just about living, just about being alive. And some of them are fairly long. Some of them are maybe 3 or 4 pages, and some of them are just a couple of lines. And some of them are quite personal. So I think there was one titled A Note to My Father. And then it was just the line saying, you didn't believe in me, so how could I believe in me? Just these moments of insight about what it is to be the child of parents who don't see you, and don't value you for who you actually are. As my parents didn't. One of the saddest things. One of the saddest things for me in my life, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. My father was very big for me in my life. My mother was there, but my father was very influential. And he died back in the late 90s, quite a long time ago now. And what I realized was it wasn't until after he died that I actually managed to achieve anything. And then I started writing books. And the sad thing is, he would have been proud of the books. He wouldn't perhaps have understood the matter that I'm writing about, but he would have been proud of that achievement. This is one of the sadnesses of life, I think. Sometimes we can't do our best work until after our parents have gone. I had this image when my father died. It was like an enormous, really big boulder rolling over, and there was this tiny little plant underneath, struggling to come into being, and that was me. That was an image that I spontaneously had when my dad died. Anyway, this is, yes. So the book was exciting for me. It is exciting. Some of the essays I really, really like. Some of them I'm not so sure about. Some of them are quite technical. I think I wrote an essay about the trauma biography, going to quite a bit more depth about the trauma biography. And I wrote about hatred. I don't think we talk enough about hatred. It seems to me to be illogical to think that a child is, that a newly created infant in the womb is capable of hatred, that it must come in from the outside. I think the child in the womb is, as we've already said, is only really interested in love, because that provides the safety and the connection with the mother for the start of life. But so, and for me, things like climate change are a symptom of our collective self-hatred. We don't look after our environment. And if we're doing IoPT work to look after our psyche, but that must also mean that we have to look after our body, because our psyche lives in our body. And so I think it's really important to set intentions about any symptom we have in our body, anything at all. And then we look at our home, and is my home a reflection of the chaos in my psyche, or is my home a reflection of the health in my psyche? And so it goes on and out into climate change, I think is, we have just been not valuing and seeing and loving our environment in the way that we should. We've been too focused on our perpetrator-victim struggles for centuries.
Yes, absolutely. I remember also on climate change, some of in the political evenings that France started in German only during the pandemic, and whenever there was a climate topic, it always brought the person back to the climate in their own family, and then even earlier in the womb. It was always a reflection. And they're also so interesting before you start to want to revolutionize something or want to rebel against something on the outside. It is very, very important to look first on the inside. There you get most of the answers. Then also your attitude on the outside will change fundamentally, because when your perspectives are shifting, you wouldn't do certain things anymore. Would like to have something totally different, something which didn't came to your mind before at all.
Yes. The only thing in our relationship with our world and our environment, the only thing we have real authority over is our reaction to what happens. How we react to what happens out there. That's what we need to think about. And we are reacting from our healthy eye or from our survival strategies with our survival. It's the only thing we really have authority over, is how I react to what happens around me and in my world. That's really an important thing, I think.
And especially also then when fears are coming up, because fears is never directed towards something. Could be, of course, if you have artillery coming your way, then fear is very real. But first it starts with all the news you're hearing, and then people are getting anxious and there's fear creeping up and so on. And that always reminds you of something which happened in the past, usually.
Somebody said, and I think I used this quote in the book somewhere, somebody said, we don't want to see what's coming. And so we don't see what's coming. We don't want it, so we don't see it. We don't think about it. We look away. And of course, this is what we've always done with trauma. I mean, trauma has been around, I don't know, since we've been human. One of the questions that I think is very interesting, it's another thing I write about in this book, is why are humans so prolifically traumatized? This is a very important question. Why because we're traumatized in a different way. I don't see that nature, other animals, are traumatized in the same way as we are, unless they have had contact with humans. Now, the elephant orphanage in Kenya, where they collect the baby elephants when the mothers have been killed by the locals for tusks or for bushmeat or whatever it is. Well, that's contact with humans. They look similarly traumatized to how we look. But the question becomes, why are we so? Because I think everybody's traumatized. I've come to this realization now. Of course, there's degrees of it. I think some people are much more seriously traumatized than others. That's true. But I think we are all traumatized. And what I realized, I was looking on the internet, and what I realized is that the human child is actually born 12 months prematurely.
Yes.
And this is because in our evolution, this had to happen, partly because our growing brain meant that our head kept growing. And so in order for the head to get out the birth channel, we had to come out earlier and earlier, because our head in relation to our body is bigger than almost any other species. Every other species has a smaller head in relation to the body because they need the body more. We need our head more. This was the direction that we took. And we also had the evolutionary problem of when we stood up, that contracted the pelvis somewhat. So these two things over millennia meant that we started to get born earlier and earlier. And there is evidence now, there is scientific discussion now on the internet, the fact that we are born, in fact, 12 months prematurely, which is why we're so incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
Of course, it means we're vulnerable to trauma.
Yes. And funny thing, talking about resonance, I have a bottle here. And the minute you start talking about it, usually my bottles don't do any sounds, don't give a reaction, and it expanded.
Oh, what
and I have this bottle on my table since not just like 5 minutes ago, but hours, I think yesterday I put it on the table. That is so funny. And you start talking about it and it makes this noise.
So I think we're in a pandemic of trauma. And part of the reason we're in a pandemic is because we're so global now that, it's not that we're living and working in a small community. We are so global now. And we are because of climate change and the pressures that are on us, all sorts of pressures, the perpetrator-victim dynamics is what is out there. That's all there is. That's all that's what the whole of our society is mainly based on. The whole of capitalism is based on competitiveness.
Yeah.
Well, competitiveness is a win-lose situation. And the biggest perpetrators then are likely to be the ones who end up on top, who end up at the top. So capitalism, and this is not in the book, but it's something I'm interested in. This didn't make it into the book. Capitalism is based on the notion that if people function on their own self-interest, that they will be able to create in their lives what they want, and that everything will level out in that way. But of course, what it doesn't take, and what it's talking about, is people who think rationally. And rationally thinking, probably it's true that people would do what's good for them, and it might all even out. But people are not rational, and they're not rational because of trauma. Because when we're functioning from our survival self, we do not function rationally.
Exactly.
So,
like the rational markets, theory in economics is so bullshit.
Yes, and we put economics, the economy, ahead of people. It's insane. It's quite insane. Definitely. I think the process that we do, one of the things I really like about the process that we do in IoPT is that it gives people the opportunity, no matter how traumatized they are, to come in touch with themselves, because they open themselves up to the resonance process. Their own issues are more in the background, and they can feel things in themselves. It's like, I know I worked with people who in their own process cannot feel anything. They are so guarded against feeling anything, but go into someone else's process as a representative, and they'll feel everything. And somehow, I say to them, somehow you have to find a way to bridge the gap, bridge the gap between what happens to you when you're in resonance with someone else's process and what happens to you.
Yeah. And I see this also, by the way, a problem with people, even those who did a lot of therapy. The question then always is, what type of therapy did you do? Because just the quantitative aspect doesn't mean you get results, you know, whatever the word is you want to use. But what I sometimes see is there is still no connection to oneself.
Yes, well, of course, there are, as far as I'm aware, no therapies that understand trauma as we do, and understand the life of the child in the womb as we do. And these two primary traumas, the trauma of identity and the trauma of love, to me, that says everything. And I don't know of any other therapy, including conventional psychotherapy, that goes to those places, to that early in the womb place, and who dares to consider the terrible taboo that we have, that mothers are sacred, that they always want their children. You know, to say that mothers don't want their children, society does not allow this, does not like this view. So then I think you're right. It seems logically true to me that if you are not doing a therapy that includes this thinking, this very early thinking, you're not really getting to the point that matters.
And you have also a section in your book with thinking and feeling, and how important it is also that both are combined with each other.
Yeah, that was an interesting understanding for me. The feedback loop, that when we think something, we feel about it. And when something happens out there and we have the emotions and whatever reaction is in us, then that goes into our thinking, and we think something and then it goes back to our feelings. And so there's this wonderful interplay of the two. And we have so long now suffered from this split between the mind and the body, which is irrational. It doesn't make any sense at all, because our mind is throughout our body, in the nervous system. Yes. So yes, it doesn't make sense to me, that split, but we've labored under that for a long time. But of course, that's another avoidance of trauma. It's another way of trauma. We split ourselves off from here and dumb down all the feelings in our body because it's too painful to go there.
That's true. And this is also when you do the work, you have also physical reactions, because some people think, oh, then it's all up here, and if I understand it, I'm done, and then it will go on smoothly, you know, without any bumps and without big, you know, mood swings. But in essence, you feel it in your body, and you can have, despite even an encounter might be with a good ending or happy ending, you can really feel strong physical reactions afterwards. And when coming back to the early stages, you have a section in your book also when you talk about adoption, when your children were separated directly after birth, and what it does to the child, to the mother, but then also to the parents or the married couple who adopt then children.
Yes, I think that's very interesting, and the process that we did, I think the intention was something like, I want to be set free. And so I didn't realize that the woman was adopted at the beginning of the process, but this is what I call a passive intention. I want to be set free, because the the impulse is, I want someone else to do this. Someone else has to set me free. So this is a passive, we could say, from a victim attitude, but I don't really like that expression, I have to say. It's a passive intention. And the interesting thing about that process was I did something that I've never done before. I brought in the original parents. So this person had never met, didn't know anything about the original parents.
Yeah.
She didn't know who they were or anything about them, but she talked about them in the process. And so I decided, all right, I'll see what happens if we bring them in. And we brought the original parents in. And the parents just cried and said, oh, we're so sorry. We shouldn't have done it, and all of this stuff. And there was something not quite right about it. I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what's going on here? There was no contact between the parents. I thought, what's going on here? And then I suddenly realized that actually these were the parents that she had created in her psyche. This was the story that she had created, a reality level 3, if you like, story that she had created about her parents. Were not the original parents. These were, of course, we know when we do the work that what we're setting up in the process is a representation of the person's psyche. So therefore, these parents were what she held in her psyche. They were her imaginings. It was her survival strategy. And so I said this. I said, I think these are the parents you have created to help you deal with the fact that you've been adopted. And her face just lit up. It just absolutely lit up. She said, that's so right. And suddenly she started to feel free. She had freed herself by realizing this reality. And she then had some very good contact with her representatives. Wow. That taught me a lot. And in fact, I wrote the essay because of that process, because it really struck me so deeply how difficult it is for someone who perhaps knows that they are adopted, but they don't know who their parents were, what they do as a child in order to fill the void, fill the gap. The gap is there's no, where are my real parents? And so in order to fill that gap, she creates this wonderful fantasy of these terribly, desperately sorry parents. Yes, of course, and if she doesn't find her parents, she'll never know. But for her, in that moment, that freed her. She freed herself in that moment by realizing that that was her survival strategy. Like their intention. So someone who writes an intention that's actually an affirmation, like I breathe calmly and happily. Well, you know, the thing is, if you have an intention, I breathe calmly and happily. The immediate question is, well, why set an intention? If that's true, why would you set an intention? Because it seems all right. But it is an intention. So underneath, you have to understand that the person doesn't breathe calmly and happily.
Yes.
That's the understanding. But then you go on, and the affirmation is something that you try and tell yourself and try and convince yourself is true. But this splits you, of course, into conflict. The part of you that says, no, it's not true. And the part of you says, yes, but you must make it true by repeating this to yourself. But the other thing I realized about affirmations is that the person gets to avoid saying what they want. And this issue of saying what we want is a big issue. Some people really find it hard to say what they want. Some people find it hard to even allow that they want anything. Their wanting ability has been so cut off right at the beginning. Their wants have been so ignored and denied. And, you know, my mother used to say to me, I want doesn't get. You know, what child to make of that? What does a child make of something like? But wanting is natural. Wanting is personal and natural.
Yeah.
To want. So I think the affirmation also is a way of avoiding for some people, scary business of saying I want something, because of course as soon as you say I want something, you're in a fear, a place where you may not get it. It may not happen. Somebody may say no to you. So it's a scary thing in a way to do, is to say that you want something. And I think an affirmation as an intention in some part is a way of avoiding committing oneself to wanting something. Very subtle, but it's there. So yes, affirmations was one thing I wrote about, rather scathingly, I have to say.
Yeah,
because it is a therapy. The affirmations are regarded as a therapy, but it seems to me it's just another survival strategy.
It's also very interesting when the want is in the intention, how different wants there are, in different stages.
So one of the primary places that the mother energy may show up is in the word want. Yeah. The three places I think are most commonly where the mother energy, the mother personality, if you like, will turn up are in the word want, the word I, and in the person themselves. And it's very interesting to me how often I see practitioners. Well, I supervise a lot of practitioners, and it's not uncommon that the practitioner will not even think about the question, where is the mother? And you'll see it. There's an assumption that all the parts are part of the person and that they just have to start talking to each other. Well, that's quite a strong absence of thinking by the practitioner, I think. The primary question for us is always, where's the mother? Or you could change that into, where's the perpetrator? Because if it's about another situation, like, say, sexual abuse by the father later on in life, then the father is likely to be there. But even so, behind all of that, the mother's going to be somewhere. And one of the reasons, of course, the word want, it's a classic place that the mother may show up, because in the trauma of identity, we have to give up on our wants and we have to identify our mother's wants. So therefore the want is likely to show the mother. The I is likely to show the mother for the similar reason, because we also have to give up on our I in the trauma of identity. We have to give up. There's a split between I and want, and there comes a split. That's the basis of the trauma of identity, that they can't talk to each other anymore, that they don't exist for each other anymore. So the I is another place where the mother turns up. But a primary place that the mother turns up is in the person themselves. And the reason for that is because of the trauma of identity. The child really has to behave towards themselves as the mother behaves towards them. So if the mother's critical, the person becomes critical of themselves. If the mother hates the child, then self-hatred becomes the connection with the mother. I must hate myself. And so these little behaviors that we do to ourselves, self-harming, of course, is down the more extreme end. Physical self-harming, bulimia, anorexia, cutting, all of these things are symptoms of self-hatred. And so they are symptoms of the mother's hatred of the child, in my view. So you have to follow it right the way back, because no creature out there, no tree, no plant, no animal out there, no other creature that I can think of ever hurts itself. We are the only species, as far as I'm aware, that hurts itself. Now, somebody may say, well, my dog chews his paws. Yes, that's possible, but he's your dog. He has contact with humans. I would challenge anybody to come up with any creature living in their natural environment in the wild that has not had contact with humans that would harm themselves. It's against life. It doesn't make sense. It's illogical for anything to harm itself. Everything just wants to be itself. Well, I look out my window here and I've got a wood that I planted, and all these trees just want to be a tree. They just want to grow and produce flowers and more trees. So at the very base of everything, and this is true for us as well, the only thing we're really focused on is replicating life, procreation. all of the other needs, basic needs that we have in our life, like finding food, protection, safety, somewhere safe to sleep, the right kind of ambient temperature, all these basic needs that Franz talks about, of course, they're all aimed towards procreation. That's the only purpose of life. The only purpose of life is to recreate itself. And we are part of that. We're no different from that. Down underneath it all, that's what we are doing.
And I had also a lot of encounters where life wants life, love, creativity, joy, expressing oneself. It is not one single thing only. And when it comes up, also sexuality, or not, the term is also a bit problematic. It was more, you know, the feminine part, the masculine part, the joy in and touching and feeling, and it encompasses all the senses. And this is what life wants, and not a drawer you open with which says misogynistic or sexist or racist, or this is not life. Creating these terms is not life.
No, but they help us. They try and help us to behave towards each other in a reasonably social way, because underneath it all, of course, we're just animals as well. Yeah, one of the things that I was writing about there is the rapaciousness, that's quite a good word, of the male species in many ways. And of course, you know, you look out in nature and the battles that go on between the males to be able to have sex with the females are sometimes very violent and even can cause death. This competitive nature is also in us, and we try and socialize ourselves by terms like misogynistic and sexist, and we try and make ourselves socially okay so that we can interact. But I think these impulses are not far below the surface. They're not far below the surface. This is why I think we try and banish this idea, and that makes it more difficult. If we understood it, and if we really come into contact with what we actually are as a species, it probably would be easier for us to find ways of living together. But, you know, our whole social system, social and cultural system in the world generally at the moment is so based on perpetrator-victim dynamics.
Yeah.
Our legal system is so based on perpetrator-victim dynamics that it's very hard for us to find a niche where we can say, no, now we can do something different. But what, of course, is encouraging is how many people are flocking at the moment to IoPT. That is quite wonderful. Yes, when I do my working sessions days, there's always 2 or 3 new people there, and I love that. I love the new people coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, and all, to your earlier point is also love and life. What I have in a lot of encounters is this playfulness. I see it with a lot of people. This, I don't want to obey societal rules, no matter from who they are, if there is mother or father, and usually both of them, and all these topics. It's like they don't leave me room to breathe and just be playful. Don't take things so super serious all the time, you know.
Absolutely. And one of the quotes, I used a couple of quotes in the book, a little essay about music. I used a couple of quotes from Keith Richards, the guitarist in the Rolling Stones, and one of the quotes is, he said, rock music is from the neck down, which I really like. Yeah, it's in the body, because it really is. But then the final quote of his that I used, he said, maybe music is the only thing we can really trust. And I thought that's really a deep statement, because it takes us out of our intellect and into our bodies.
Yes.
It's one of the most wonderful ways of coming into our bodies. And how much in the last century, the 20th century, music became something that you didn't sit in your chair listening to, you got up and moved to. And I related the book a little experience I had when I was, I think, about 16 something, very young and very naive. A friend of mine got tickets to the Beatles Christmas show at the Hammersmith Odeon in London. This was very early in their life. And the Hammersmith Odeon was a cinema. So, we went and everybody had a seat. Nobody was in their seats. Nobody. It was absolute chaos. The people in charge could not hold on to what was going on in the room. There was so much excitement and so much in the body. I think that's I think Keith Richards is right. Music is something we can really trust because it's in our body, what it brings up in us, in our body. So it was little things like that. I watched an interview with him. He's a very interesting man. Of course, he's led a very wild life and is traumatized, of course, as we all are. But he's very interesting. He's thought through a lot of things.
Yeah, I liked him especially with Pirates of the Caribbean and how Johnny Depp based his performance on Keith Richards, movements and behaviors, and then he got a part in being his dad. There was like some snippets of behind the scene of Pirates of the Caribbean, and I loved it.
I didn't see it. I must watch it. I didn't see it.
Yeah, music and dancing, they're so close to each other. That is what I love to do always when I was young, until even after the divorce, I went back and I went dancing all the time. This is what I really love.
Put music on and I can't stay in my seat. It's just wonderful. It's a wonderful thing, music and dancing.
We are full of water, and the frequencies, they resonate, and everyone has a different, love for different types of music, One thing I wanted to ask you as well, I'm just looking at your, book here, is burnout. I'm asking also because I lately have again a lady coming to me who, put a break into her working life because of burnout. And what was your experience here?
But I think I have this drawing, which is in the other book, about the journey through stress to high stress and then the drop down into trauma. And I think burnout is living at this high stress trauma pivot point for too long, where you can't come back down to a calm place. I mean, life is being alive is a stress on the system. It's not a bad stress. It's a good stress. I mean, just getting up and walking around is a stress on the system. Eating a meal is a stress on the system, but in a very, a very healthy way. But burnout is when the stress gets too high and too constant. And I think we are too close to our trauma, and that burnout is probably a continual moment of re-traumatization, continual moments of re-traumatization. I did get very stressed when I had the center I had in London, which was, I only had it for 3 years, and it was wonderful to have for 3 years, but it was really a terrific financial stress for me. And particularly in the summer, it would be stressful because the money wasn't coming in and I still had to pay the rent. The rent was very high. And I can remember feeling just so stressed on occasion about how I was going to pay the rent, keep paying the rent, and keep paying the rent. And when COVID happened, because I kept the premises on because I didn't know how long COVID was going to be, and so the bills were piling up. That was a very stressful time for me. And then the moment when I decided I've got to get out of this, I can't keep this going anymore. But the thing about stress that I've realized is that however long you are under high stress, I'm talking about, not just every day getting out and living your life, but under high stress, however long you are under high stress for, you need at least half that time to recover. So if you are under really stress, a lot of stress for 2 or 3 years or something, let's say, which I think I was, then I think you need about 1.5 years to relieve it. It doesn't just go. It has such a toll on the body. It takes time to re-normalize yourself or homeostatic. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but to re-regulate yourself from stress. It's a killer.
Yeah.
And burnout is a killer. It raises your blood pressure, it raises your heart. Your heart rate is at a continual rate. Your blood pressure is continually high. It's so unhealthy for people. And it's a constant re-traumatization. And to stay in that, of course, and not come out of it is a survival strategy. It's a mix. It's a survival strategy not to deal with what's underlying, with what the problem is that you're underlying, because most often our stress is an avoidance of ourselves. We're putting ourselves under stress to avoid what's going on underneath. So it's a mix of a re-traumatization and a survival strategy so that we don't feel the trauma underneath everything. I'm very interested too in symptoms. So much of our lives are symptoms of trauma. So much of what we complain about or what we see happening in the world are symptoms of trauma. Yeah, like climate change, symptom of trauma. Brexit, symptom of trauma.
Oh la la. Oh, by the way, when you say Brexit, did anyone ever created an intention with Brexit?
Not I haven't worked with anybody who's done anything about that. You know, it's interesting to look at the people that are at the top in politically in countries at the moment.
Oh gosh.
They're all traumatized, and most of them are psychopaths. Most of them are on the psychopathic spectrum. And I had this going back to the capitalist thinking. You may remember, and your listeners may remember, the Occupy movement and the 1% and the 99%. And what I was thinking is, well, the 99% are most of us who are traumatized and don't think rationally all the time, because when we're in our survival strategies, we don't think rationally. And so we can't make the success necessarily of our lives that we would like, and many fail, and that's why we have so many homeless. And then the 1% are all psychopaths. They're all people who have reached such a point of perpetration that they have numbed themselves completely to any feelings of guilt or shame about what they do. That's how they've got there. And, you know, for me, it seems logical. It's only a psychopath who can want to sit on billions and billions of dollars. What do you need that for? Why do you need all that money? Nobody needs that much money. What are you going to do with it? This is a symptom of psychopathy, in my view. Someone who wants to sit on a huge amount of money. Even they give some money away to charities and things like that. Well, that makes them look good. I'm not going to be fooled by that.
It's another business model.
It's another. Yeah, it is. Yes. And it's very interesting that the term psychopathy actually came from the business world. It didn't come from the psychological world. The sociopath is the psychological world, but the word psychopath actually came from the business world. It was developed by a man called Robert Hare, I think his name was. And he was thinking about how businesses work. And they work with the psychopath at the top. Management.
Yeah, also I had a group session on Sunday, and there someone told me about an interview she had read about Angela Merkel, you know, who was our former chancellor for many, many years. And with the Ukraine war, she got re-traumatized again. She said she felt, I'm not sure if it was only anxiety or even more than that, but she felt all the former German Democratic Republic, the GDR, you know, this authoritarian system, and in combination, of course, with Russia, and that reactivated also body symptoms with her. And she, and the lady told me that Angela Merkel, this is right what she said to me, said that she's happy to not be in charge anymore right now, because she wouldn't be able to deal with it.
Yeah, because she grew up in East Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that makes you think. She's honest enough to say it.
Yeah,
right?
I was very surprised to hear that.
You think, what's going on with these people who are leading different countries? This is why I can only think that they're psychopaths, because otherwise they would be feeling, and they're not.
Yes, maybe also the search to the top, and there's always someone above you, and you're still trying, and there's someone who has more billions than you have. So again, you have to do more. So this is like a never-ending story.
The competitive nature of capitalism. Capitalism is based on competition, and this, in my view, false notion that people will always behave rationally and always try to do what's best for them. Well, bulimia and anorexia are not ways of doing the best for you. They're not rational behaviors. Cutting yourself is not a rational behavior. Addiction is not a rational behavior. Not in terms of being alive and life. Nothing out there is doing these terrible things to themselves.
And also when I'm just listening, looking at your book right now, there's a chapter you write about the danger of being a whistleblower. Do you want to elaborate on this one shortly?
Well, yes, of course. The person who decides to take themselves and their trauma seriously and do IoPT work is always in danger in terms of the family system. And this is why some people feel like they have to not have contact with their families while they're doing the work, because it would be impossible. And the worst thing you can do is rush home excited and say, I've just realized this, that, and the other. You didn't want me as a child. Whoa. The system is not going to welcome that. And no part of the system. It often happens a rift between siblings, because the children are loyal to their parents, and one sibling goes and starts to say things that are disloyal, the other siblings will round against them.
Yes.
So whistleblowers, I mean, we've seen in the public arena people like Snowden and Julian Assange and people like this, how denigrated they are for quite sensible whistleblowing. What Edward Snowden did was really an important whistleblowing job, but he's now stuck in Russia. He can't go home. He would be tried as a traitor if he goes home. Chelsea Manning also. And this happens in families. So if the person who takes their trauma seriously and takes themselves seriously and then goes home and behaves differently will meet antagonism.
Yes.
And anger even. And maybe even, I was thinking about this the other day. Somebody who said that they had gone home and said something about not being wanted as a child or something like that. I can't remember what it was. And the mother said, I never want to see you again. You don't exist anymore. So this is a killing off of the person.
Yeah.
This is danger for whistleblowers, that you get killed off. Not necessarily physically killed off, but you get emotionally and psychologically killed off by your family. Can't handle it. Yes. I did a whistleblow on my family once, with my father. My father had this habit of saying to me, your mother wants me to talk to you about such and such. And I just, went along with it all my life. And then my first marriage broke up, and I went to see my parents, and my father said to me, your mother's very worried about you, your marriage. It's only 4 years, your marriage, and why is it broken up? And for the first time in my life, I said to him, all right, I'll go and talk to her then. And this was not allowed. And he didn't know how to handle it, really. It was a very interesting moment. So I said, are you calling me a liar? I said, no, of course not. But you're saying that my mother is worried. I think I should go with you. And that was really very, very challenging for him. And but that's not what I'm talking about. I mean, that's a mild whistleblow, right? But it's just an example of how if you do something different, if you behave differently, there's a danger. If you don't behave how you're expected to behave by your parents, then there's a danger.
I experienced this as well. Not all my life, but when I got older and started with IoPT, and was angry also. There was some anger coming up also towards my younger brother, because don't they see what is happening at the time, first with my mother, but she was only one part. My father, was equally a perpetrator and a victim, both, the deeper I dig into their stories, unwantingly, but it happens, the more shit is coming up, let me say it that way. But when I started to call out certain things at that time, firstly with my mother, there was a big no-go. And the context in my family was, no, you are the problem, Natalie. You are the problem. If you would deal differently, if you would behave differently, don't take it so serious, don't take everything literally. Why do you get so emotionally all the time? It is your problem. You are the problem.
Yes, of course. But then you see the answer really is not to even bother to talk about it with them.
Yeah. And I tried it a second time as well when the sexual abuse by my father came up. I really had this inner feeling I need to write it down and send him a letter. And then he said, I'm psychotic and I should see a doctor. Yeah. And right now, after many, many years later, I wouldn't have done it, to be honest with you, because while in that time it felt the right thing to do right now, and I was a bit encouraged by the time always, because at that time in IoPT it was a hard thing. You had to break the ties with your parents. That was, at least in Germany, always the recommendation, but by France and others as well. When some things came up, deep traumas, you have to break the ties with your parents. I wouldn't do so anymore. I would take it really step by step only and always stay with me, and rather talk to the therapist than doing something like this. Because in some cases, especially with siblings, I think you have to be a bit more careful as well. And there is no black and white answer anyways.
Absolutely. And it can be actually dangerous. And of course, this is what happens in the courts as well.
The
perpetrator will say, well, this person is psychotic. And what she's saying is absolutely not true. And the courts so often tend to believe the perpetrator rather than the victim. It's very, very challenging. Yeah, it is very challenging to be in a situation that you describe. And I think I don't remember that extreme kind of policy in IoPT. I don't remember that, and that may be because I wasn't in Germany.
Yes, that is what a lot of people say who were not present on site.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know what that's to do with, but I don't remember that. And I've always thought, be very careful about what you go and tell your parents about what you're learning. You don't have to. And actually, if you are telling your parents, it is because you still want them to love you. You want them, if you're going to tell your parents about what the bad things that they have done to you, why are you doing it? What is it that you still want from them?
Exactly.
You want them to agree, to be sorry, to apologize, to make amends.
Yes.
You are still wanting your parents to love you.
Yes.
And that's a ball and chain around your ankle.
Yes.
So I think, yeah, much more. One of the things I've been thinking about just recently, because I have had some trouble with friends who are not involved in IoPT, and really finding how difficult it is to be me, to really be me, with people who don't understand what I'm talking about. And it's not even that I need to talk about it, but I do need to be able to make a comment on some social thing that's happening from my perspective.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've realized as well is how threatening it is to other people. Our perception, our view, how threatening it is, deeply threatening it is to other people. If they don't want to know it. So what this has led me to believe, to think more, is just how important our IoPT society is, just how important our connection with each other in our community is, because we do understand what we're talking about. We do speak the same language.
So
and
true.
Out there they don't.
Yes.
Out there, I mentioned trauma, and people say, oh yes, well, trauma, we've been talking about trauma for years. No, we haven't. No, we haven't. Not properly, not really. And so that's one of the things I feel very strongly, is that we as a community really have to value our community, because it's, in some ways, it's the only place where we can feel understood in what we're saying. We can feel understood when we want to talk about the fact that my mother didn't want me, and this is what the result has been, how it's made my life difficult or whatever, and how much I'm achieving now. We can't talk about that outside of our community. And the other thing that is very there's an essay I put in the book called "What Kind of a Future Do We Want?" Which I think is really important, because we're a very loose community at the moment, of people who are very experienced, people who are less experienced, people who don't have much experience at all, but who understand in some ways what we're saying. And we've been doing quite well so far, so good. But we need to start to think a little bit more about how we hold ourselves as a community. And so I wrote that essay to think about, we're professionals, and most professions have an association. I don't agree with us having an association, because I think most associations of that kind, I'm speaking from my experience of my own association in the UK, which I'm not a member of now. I resigned from it some years ago. But so many of these associations function on perpetrator-victim dynamics. I don't think forming that kind of association would be viable for us, because it doesn't conform with our basic principles of autonomy and self-responsibility. But that does then create some challenges for us to think about how we should organize ourselves, or how, if we organize ourselves at all, or what can we do to deal with certain issues. So the two basic issues that I feel are the most important are what I call fitness to practice. I am fit to practice, that I am capable of good practice. And of course, from my survival self, I can't see that. I can only see that from my healthy eye. And other associations have accreditation procedures and blah, blah, blah. People tell you you're all right to practice. That would be against our basic values. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't think about the issue. We have to think about the issue, because otherwise we have people representing IoPT out there who are not doing IoPT, and this creates confusion. So, and the other issue that I think is really important that we have to think about is ethics. and we have in our basic principles, ethics embodied in our basic principles. But there are ethical behaviors that we need to think about, like what do we do if a client that we've worked with makes a complaint to somebody else about us? How does that somebody else deal with it? And how do we deal with what we see as not good practice by our colleagues? What do we do about these things? How can we hold these values properly together? I mean, another thing is, I think a lot of people who are new to IoPT think it's very simple because, it's just the face with the three little faces and that's it. But it's not. It's incredibly dense as a theory. It's as a theory, very deep as a theory. And in my view, it takes years to really get it. And I still am finding things that I didn't see before from the theory. And so the new people who see this very simple version of it, then what I see happens is go to other theories to try and prop them up. So go to, not that there's anything wrong with, other theories like somatic experiencing and Gabor Mate and Bessel van der Kolk and other people who are thinking about trauma. They're thinking seriously about trauma. I still think that they're missing something, but they're thinking seriously about trauma. To prop up when the IoPT work that they're doing fails. And it fails because they don't understand the theory deeply enough. And so they start to bring in other disciplines, and the thing gets diluted and becomes something that I would say, this is not IoPT. Our ability to practice is not fixed. We cannot never say, I am a good practitioner and that's it. We are always in process ourselves. And we do need to think about these things. So I apologize for bringing it up again, but it's because I feel quite passionate about it. And the good thing about IoPT is we can talk about this. I can remember when I trained as a psychotherapist, and the notion that you project things onto other people was very common, but it was often used as a shaming weapon. So someone would say to you, oh, you're projecting onto me. And it would be really not said in a nice way. Whereas what we have in IoPT is this understanding we're all in the same boat. And it just creates a whole different atmosphere. We're all in the same boat. We're all traumatized. And we all go into survival at times. Then it's not something that we have to feel ashamed about. We just understand it. We just get it. We know we all have survival strategies. We know that things can trigger us into survival. And, it doesn't, for me, I've been doing this for years, and I got triggered the other day massively into my survival. This is probably never going to completely go. But I learned a lot from it. That's the thing. I learned a huge amount from that triggering. But we have this common understanding, and I think this is something that, the competitiveness, there is competitiveness in IoPT. I've seen it. And in a way, it's understandable. There's competitiveness in nature as well. But it needs to not get too out of hand, the competitiveness. It needs to be tempered with the reality of understanding what's healthy and what's survival, and that we're all traumatized.
But I think what you're just doing right now, talking about it, that is the most important point, because we never, at least in Munich, we never talk about it, And I think it has to be addressed, that we are all in the same, that there is a lot of competition, and try to take this as an opportunity rather than creating conquer and divide again.
It's interesting. I was just thinking as you were saying that is competitiveness a natural feature of being human or any species? And of course, in the understanding of trauma, our competitiveness probably stems from our need to get our mother's love.
Mm-hmm.
Who are we going to compete with? Do we have to compete with our father, with our siblings, to try and get our mother's love? So there's competition right there. But that doesn't mean that we have to be cutthroat,
yes,
competitive.
Yeah.
And if we deal with our trauma and understand that it's because of trauma, then maybe we don't need to be so competitive. But I was thinking about nature, and of course, nature, there is a competitiveness. Of course, predation is a competitiveness in nature. So I guess competitiveness is natural, but it needs to be tempered, I think, tempered with understanding and clear thinking.
Yes.
Yes. It doesn't help us as practitioners to be competitive with each other.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the thing I would say. It really doesn't help us. The reality is that we're all different, and we're all working at different levels, and we're all at different experiences and so on and so forth. It doesn't really help to be competitive. All competitiveness does, from my own experience, it means that you don't talk to somebody. That's not of any use. I don't talk to my competitors because, I did that for a long time, I think. Yeah. And now I'm talking to the person I was competitive with, and I think, oh gosh, that was ridiculous to feel so competitive. Doesn't make any sense. Doesn't help. The high-flying businessmen are highly competitive.
Yes.
They think they're competing for money and ownership, but they're not. They're competing for love. It's just that it's converted into cash. Cash is the symbol. Is a symbol of love. Yeah. All right. So there's another thought.
That's one of the reasons why I left the IT industry. That is
right.
one of the major reasons. Yes, this huge, huge competitiveness, and the fact that it's never enough. Enough is never enough. There's always the next year, the next quarter, the next month, the next colleague, the next presentation, the next event, the next technologies coming up.
And it's because we never get the love that we wanted from our mother.
And also the father as well, because he shows us that we are capable of. He brings us, when the bonding gets loose with the mother, the older the child gets, the more you need the father as well. He needs to step up as well, because he brings you in this courageous situation when you then go into life, that you trust also yourself and your power and your strength and all of that. And that's lacking as well. So both crumble together. And a spreadsheet and I don't know, a CEO will do then, is then the substitute, but it's never, and money will also never be.
He's just the big money owners of the world are just as traumatized as the serial killers.
Oh, yeah.
How's that? I just thought that. I don't know if it's really true, but I just suddenly thought there's two poles here we have. Just as traumatized. Yes, must be.
Especially for the ones who have never enough. It was so interesting. We have here a book, like you say, an open book, not casket, but shelves where you can put in your old books and you can take any book you want. So you swap and change and anything. And I love that. So around my town, there are quite some. And since about a year and a half, I'm just reading random books, which I would have never bought, never have dared to search for it, and so on. And once I went, I found Shirley MacLaine's biography. And the way she got into acting, dancing first, then acting. And then also she went on that spiritual path. But it was quite interesting that she said at some point in time, and her husband also was grown up in Japan. So he then moved to Japan. So she always flew back and forwards from the US to Japan and got in contact with all the Asian culture and countries as well. Not only Japan, but also other countries around Asia. And it was so interesting when she said, well, she had that Hollywood stardom factor, you know, was an A-listing actress. But then she said at some point, that's okay. So I'm earning my money to do other things. So the money is okay. Whenever I need money, I return to acting. But I love doing other things. And I think that's the point when there is no tipping point anymore, when there enough is not enough, then money and fame and power, I think, is super, super problematic.
Yes, absolutely. And fame too. There was another essay I wrote about fame. I don't remember that one. Just trying to think what I said. Yes. Well, I think the essence of what I said was you can achieve what you want to achieve without becoming famous, and that the fame is a problem because either people try to pull you down, or they exalt you and make you into something you're not, and you can end up believing it.
Yeah.
Fame is not healthy.
I'm not sure if Russell Brand said it, that he thought that when he got famous, you know, all the problems he had would be solved. And in essence, you know, it creates more issues than on top of it, because being prepared to deal with fame is also a task on its own, you know.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting. In terms of money, I've always been in debt. All my life I've been in debt. Not hugely, but I've always, you know, I've had credit cards and mortgages and loans and things like this. Always been in debt, but I've always had enough. I've always had enough money for what I want and need to do.